Awesome. Well, my name is Jerry Grable, and I make fonts in my free time. And this is my first time streaming, so hello, internet. I'm doing this because there's not a whole lot of things to do right now when we're all in quarantine, and I wanted to show what my type design process is like. Um, Maybe share some tips on working with vectors. I'll show you the program that I'm working with, give you some tips on navigating other softwares. Um, and pretty much just showing you how to digitize letters. I'm working with a base script right now, so I'll show you how to turn a sketch or a drawing into a digital letter form. Um, but yeah, I'm looking forward to showing you guys this. Cool, stream is good. Yeah, it's my first time doing it. So, alright, this is a font that I've been working on. But first, before we get going, let's start talking about the program that I'm using. This is called Glyphs app. It is a program specifically for Mac, but there's other available open source that's free, like Font Forge, I think, is one that's free. Open Fonts or Open Type. There's another one that's for free, but Glyphs is a paid program. The best alternative for Windows would be FontLab. I love FontLab. Shout out to their development team. It's a great program, but personally, I like the interface for Glyphs. It's a little bit more intuitive. FontLab has a bunch of extra features that I do take advantage of sometimes with a font when it's further down along the development process, although they have some good sketching features as well. But it's just such a big program, it gets clunky. So I prefer Glyphs because it's a little bit slimmed down. You can focus on the letter forms. But yeah, speaking of letter forms, when you're starting a font, it's usually good to start with sketches. What I've been working with is I'm adamant about studying the history of fonts, where they come from, and basically historical calligraphy, how handwriting has essentially shaped a lot of the fonts that they did define some of the fonts that began being developed. Sorry, I get nervous and to start babbling. But I am adamant about, if you're doing anything type design, anything lettering related, get some first-hand samples of either fonts that have been made in the style that you're trying to do, or look at where that maybe style comes from. So for example, today, this that you're looking at here this is multiple styles, but it's essentially a round hand or a copper plate, is another common term for it. And I'm working on a kind of new style. I'm trying to synthesize a couple different copper plate styles. If you study the history of 2010, you'll see that it changes based on the country, based on the pins that are being used. Over time, economy of speed changed the way the letters are formed and shaped. There's a whole bunch of factors that affect that, but it's important to study the history of calligraphy and how letter forms were originally made, because that's really laid the foundation for type. And I think today, even moving forward, when we're moving into a digital space, we need to retain this traditional calligraphy practice, at least in understanding the models of handwriting when we're developing digital fonts. I think that's really important. So I'll kind of show you what my historical revival process is like. So yeah, I'm working with a couple of samples. This font that I'm calling this font was inspired by a little postcard that I got from a booklet of type samples or photographs of old specimens from Farrer Jones Type, Tobias, his type company. And I saw this slide in here, and it's from Bruce's New York Type Foundry. And I think the name of the font was one nice character or one Nick character, something like that. So I used this as a base and started developing some of the characters. But on top of that, I was doing a lot of other research too, like looking at how other capitals are constructed, how the loops are varied on some of the other fonts. Here's some more capitals, just to kind of give some variety and reference how the weights are being weighted. Like sometimes the weight is on the right side of the ovals for some of these characters, and other fonts it's on the left side. So trying to keep that in mind as far as building consistency into your font and how it's being displayed or perceived. Here's more of a Spencerian style, not it's used with a different nib, different kind of nib shape, and it has these big swooping curves instead of the more tighter. Excuse me. Yeah, so I pulled a couple off of this. I used some of these characters for one of the Spencerian stylistic sets, and then I used the penman, referencing some of those capitals, and there was one more on the plate. The archival type. Oh yeah, archival type penman script they developed a font was similar to what I was kind of leaning towards, so I borrowed their proportions for a lot of the capital letter forms, actually, not any for the lowercase. And so it's good to look at other people's fonts, how they're doing their calligraphy. That way, you know, there's precedent. You don't need to reinvent the wheel, essentially, is what the point of this is. Check in on my screen, see if we're still live. I've never done this before, so I'm still. And so it's good to look at other people's fonts, how they're doing their calligraphy. Sorry, this is my first time streaming, so bear with me. I'm going to be going into the type design now. So first, what I wanted to show you is, I talked about sketches, points of references. First, what we'll start is showing you a monoline. You see some of these monoline sketches are out here, so let's work with. I'm actually working with the character G. I'm on that character right now, so we're going to start with the character G. And then there's an alternative as well. So here's two different G forms. One's more Spencerian in style, one's more copperplate in style, but where you'll really see that is when we start adding the weights, the different contrasts of thick to thin letter forms. But right now we just have the monoline form. I'm going to work off of this one because we still have a sketch layer that's on our top layer here. And so I'm just going to actually just pretend like that doesn't exist. And we'll try doing this from scratch to give you guys some background. If you're new to Glyphs, ask me some questions. I'm sure I'll do streams in the future about Glyphs specifically, some features that I like to take advantage of, how to drag and drop these images, what I like to do for scaling them and positioning them. But for now, let's just get into creating some letters. I'm going to use the pen tool here, P on the Mac, to get to that. And first, what I like to do is just map out a basic skeleton of the font. Don't worry about the curves. I like adding handles for now just because we're going to be using the handles a little later. But don't worry initially how the... See, this is a totally wonky curve. We don't want this. We'll clean this up later. So just use this as a reference. And then I'm going to keep two separate strokes. I'm going to shift that over for a second. And I'm going to start again from there. A little bit of a curve. Then this is going to swoop down. And then keeping in mind this is going to be thick to thin. This is going to be thicker in contrast. This part right here. I'm going to dip it a little lower. And then we'll build out that inner negative space later on. But first we'll just put one around there and then we'll get a tad. We'll come back and adjust that. So again, continuing, not worrying about the handles. We'll get one there. One there. It kind of ends in a little downward hook like that, so we'll hook it back. Isn't that the most beautiful G you've ever seen? Congratulations, you are the next Giovanni Marderstein. If you don't know who that is, welcome to my world. You'll be hearing his name a lot. Alright, so we're shifting this back over into place. Make sure these extrema, the totally vertical point, totally horizontal point, those are the extrema, whereas this is not an extrema, it's kind of an intermediate point. So yeah, we'll move those back into the place on the extremes of the line. Now, I was, in my experience reading articles, I forget who this is from. I was trying to do some more research this morning to figure out who was the type designer who spoke about it. But I was taught when making vector curves to start with your extremes, like we did already, then pull the shape of your letter form out of the curves. So you're not trying to outline the outer side of it or draw the negative space of the letter. Start with the monoline, start with the extremes, and build the shape out of what you started with. And try not to worry about moving the extremes. Just trust where you place them initially on the sketch, of course. So it's aligned on the sketch. You know it'll look a little bit good. Just pull it out like that. So I'll show you how to do that. I'm using Alt or Option on Mac. And you just click anywhere on a curve and holding Alt, and I like to shift, and you can just pull this curve out, see, just to kind of give it a nicer arc there. We'll do the same thing on this one, and I like to balance it out, so keeping in mind trying to balance your curves as best you can, so you don't want one handle super high up like this and then super short. You want them to be a little bit more of a consistency, and we can look at this year's. The value is 42 points. This handle is 42 points up. This handle is 31 points, so we could even make that 40 points, 40 points. So now they're actually even. It doesn't look good, but we can shift it over and work on the shape of that. And then maybe pull it in a little bit. So it looks a little bit better. And so again, so here's a long curve. I'm going to move this out a bit. And shift the handle, and then again holding the Option key, Alt key, what that does, if you can grab this, you can grab a handle anywhere. I guess it does do that. Yeah, so it is pulling that out, and see, this program's great. I highly recommend Glyphs. I think it's a couple $100. It's a big investment, but I use it over Illustrator every day of the week. I'll actually work logos on Glyphs, because you get much more fine control of these toony lines, or the little handles, vector handles. And you see that you can just pull out your cursor like that, and it just, tightens up your curves or loosens them up. So you get that nice arc going all the way up like that. See, that's a pretty good start. We got a good loop. Let's finish out this first curve. And again, I like to look at the values too. I'm big. Math isn't good to know when you're doing type design. Basic geometry, basic algebra. So you see this point here is located 612, 214. But the handle, okay, so 63 points out. Sometimes what I'll do is I'll even it out, make it like an even 60 or something. And then we'll even out this one. That one's already at a 60, see, I've done this. You just sometimes get an eye for how they balance out. And it's looking a little bit sharp on that corner. Let's balance this one out first too, that'll help. So see, I see this still feels a little wonky. So that's when I'll go back through and refine it. I'll show you that further. So yeah, that first curve is looking a lot more smooth. So you see the difference? You set your extremes. Don't worry about, just trust that you have that initial shape of the letter form there, and then pull the curves out of it. And then make sure you even those out a little bit. Keeps it nice and smooth. Not straight, smooth. You want the curves to be nice and smooth. At least for this style, a pointed pen font. It's yeah, you want these letter forms to be really smooth. So for example, this is what happens when you don't hold the Alt key or Option key. When you don't have a locked handle, it goes all wonky. So again, holding that Alt Option key allows you to have a little bit more fine-tuned control. Shift that out a bit, magic. And then I guess we can actually lock these up. Okay, so we got two linked. This is a whole chunky area, and we're going to be building that out later on. What I'm going to do, again, also if you hold the Alt Option key and grab a center, you can move the node along the Tooney lines. So you see you got your lines here. You can move your node along that line, but retain the shape of the curve, but just change the speed in and out of each side. So yeah, I'm just going to shift that one down from up here down here a bit. We'll pull this out. You can also nudge it to, I use the Alt option, and then I'll use arrow keys to just nudge it up 1, Shift 5 at a time. Command, you could do 10, 100. But yeah, we'll just actually shift it down, pull this in like that. That's pretty good. Sorry, give me one sec. Sorry, I'm trying to let some people know that I'm online. There we go. Alright, I'm back. Sorry about that. Are we still up and going? People still watching me? Listening to me being crazy? Cool. I'm going to march forward with no viewers. Alright, so again, continuing, holding the Alt key, Option key. Oh, there's a dog outside. Let's keep pulling those curves out like that. Again, keeping a nice even 95. This one's 85. That's nice. We'll balance that out later. Pulling this out. And I'm using the space bar to go back and forth between these. Sorry if you have epilepsy. I do not recommend watching my videos. I'm going to pull that out. This one I'm going to shift. I'm actually going to move that point all down altogether. I'm going to pull it more into that space. I'm going to keep it balanced between this, see this distance between these two versus the distance between these two. I want to even those out more, so I'm going to pull those down. And then we'll reshape this curve a little bit. So that's pretty good. This one's all funky. But we're going to be playing with that, I guess. Yeah, we'll be playing with that in a second, because that whole, that's where the thick stroke comes in. Alright, cool. That's a pretty decent monoline. Let's see how it compares to my first version. Yeah, so again, not my finest first attempt at a monoline, but let's do some refining. Now, I like to use this program called SpeedPunk for Glyphs. It is a fantastic program it calculates the speed of your vector curves. So you'll see these red lines showing up. Yanon, I don't know how to pronounce your name, but check out his website, yanone.de, and his program, I recommend the software. So yeah, I installed that a while back, and what it does when I even activate it, it gives you these markers that show you the speed of your curves and where there's mismatchings and kind of like, clippings on if a handle overshoots another handle. It has to do with the way that they calculate points on a line, points of a curve. So it's advanced calculus that I don't know. But what I'll do is I'll use this program, which you'll see right there, to just smooth out the total direction or evenness of these lines, so there's not any kinks in it anymore. See that? show you again. So we did a pretty good job actually. There's not too many kinks. But I have to start with major curves too, keeping this in mind. The sharpest, you'll see here, the sharpest points in your fastest curves, like right here, you got to keep that in mind because that's going to be a point of interest for the eye. My eye gets drawn to when the eye naturally gets drawn to where more fields of color are next to each other. Laws of proximity. So if you see two objects near each other, you associate them. So if you see two font lines next to each other, especially at a distance, small scale, bad vision, those lines blur together and looks like one bigger line. So again, same concept. When you have a curve that's tighter like this, from a distance, it's gonna draw more, it's gonna look more clustered and have more of a emphasis up in that corner. So I like to start by working on the extreme corners of the font. So I'll start with this corner, move down to this corner, then go to this one, then work on the whole overall shape of it. So we did the top one. Same for this one, holding Option Shift, we'll shift it over, and again, just make that nice curve, even that curve out. It's pretty good. Move up to this one. Easy does it, and then see, sometimes this will happen too, and sometimes you do want this kind of flaring. So just because it's off-kiltered like that doesn't mean it's a bad shape. It's just you need to be intentional with when you're breaking the smoothness of your vector lines. So if you shift it up, you can kind of see how it gets that flatter shape along this. But we really want these, at least for this font, I want to build the swooping curves of that copperplate calligraphy business hand that you'd see signed on old-time checks and whatnot. So you keep that nice, see it's nice and smooth, small, and then there's an even gradation up to the peak like that. I want to build that type of curve, speed, characteristic into my font. So keeping that in mind as I go, I can be more intentional with how I'm shaping these curves. For example, see it gets thin here, it gets a little bit thicker, but then it gets thinner a little bit halfway through this curve, so it's a little bit oblong. It's like almost if I pulled it in like that is what's happening slightly. I can just barely see it. It's kind of hard to see, but to exaggerate it, I'll pull it in. It does look like that, but only so slightly. So actually what I'll do is I'll pull it out a little bit more to add more emphasis to that extreme point in the curve, which is along the vertical, the diagonal axis like these ones. So trying to match up the emphasis on these curves in that same kind of arc. So again, I'll tighten the curve up so it's more speed in the corner, and then I'll smooth out the edges a little bit. And that way, there's not as much, there's no break. It gets it thick, bigger, all the way to the thickest point, and then it thins out all the way to the thinnest point. It doesn't go thicker than thinner, then thicker than thinner. So you got to keep that in mind when you're shaping the vector curves. Sorry if my language is advanced. If you have any questions, please comment. I'll be looking at what you guys ask. I'll be trying to, I need to use language that's more accessible to people who aren't type designers. So again, ask me any questions of words that I'm using that don't make sense, or if you have anything to add, please, if you have experience with type design, please share me your tips too. I'd love to see how you are tackling some of these same challenges. Just check out what the lowercase g looks like too, just for fun. Yeah, so that's step one. Made a monoline for the G. We'll see how that compares to the first one. It's a little bit more. I actually like my first sketch more. See, this is a little bit. I like this more swooping curve down here. And when we build out the thicker part there, I think this wider curve is what we're going for. This feels too flat to me. But overall, this one does have a more even. I like the hook. There's a nice sharp hook on that. It's like you actually are starting your pen right there. You could kind of go up and hook it all the way down. So kind of like that. Great. Let's turn this. I'm actually going to use this one, not this one that I just made. Sorry if you made that one. Well, a great Seattle type designer once told me, Fonts are never finished, only forgotten. So we're going to forget that letter, and then we're going to work off my initial sketch. But what I'm going to do is pull it back into this top layer as well. So there's my initial sketch. And tools for making your monoline into a weighted font. So having contrast from thick to thin lines. The first thing to bear in mind, this is again a little bit of an advanced concept, but your font metrics, I actually haven't set my vertical and horizontal stems yet, but basic type anatomies, there's two axes for the contrast, essentially. There's a horizontal axis for contrast, and there's a vertical axis for contrast. And so your stems, there's a vertical stem. See this whole downstroke right here is a vertical stem. And then this little corner right here, this is the vertical stem, or the horizontal stem. This is the horizontal stem because it's the horizontal axis, and it's the thin, for this font, it's the thinnest part of the contrast. This is the vertical stem, and for this font, it's the heaviest part of the contrast. Oh my gee, I need to fix this really quick. That shape is supposed to be alright, yeah, there's a tiny bit of a cutout if you notice. I kind of like this font because there's little subtle details like that. Like this down, the vertical stem is not perfectly straight all the way down. The negative space of this G counter cuts into the shape of the stem just really slightly, so it thins up that, allowing for the negative space to feel more open in that tight, really condensed. That's what I like about this font. It's a very condensed copperplate form, so it's a little bit more functional. You can get some legible lines out of it instead of just one word that's super ornate, and then it's like you can barely read it. You know, I like building legibility in my fonts. Okay, where was I? Alright, making this, so yeah, we talked about the vertical stems, horizontal stems. So for this one, the horizontal stem is thinner, the vertical stem is thicker. So you want to keep that in mind. So here would be the vertical stem, right here is the thickest part. There'd be a little bit thicker part on this curve, a little bit thicker part on this curve, because those are the vertical stems. It's a little bit slanted, but then the horizontal ones right here, all the way down here, I guess, and these bottoms are going to be really thin. So keeping that in mind, when we're going to use this tool called, going to filter, offset curve, and essentially if you're using Illustrator, you can do the same exercise in Illustrator basically. Just use a same monoline, use a stroke tool to make it however thick your stroke you want to be, and then you can expand that object, the stroke, into like a solid positive form, and then you can work with the negative forms. So for offset curve, I'm going to use 3 points on the horizontal axis. So what that's going to do is, on the horizontal axis, it's going to take, so horizontal, it's going to shift the curve horizontally 3 pixels. So it's going to shift it this way 3 pixels. So from the center, it's going to go out 3, out 3. You'll have 6 wide, essentially. And then on the vertical here, I actually have it set to 2.5, so that on any vertical parts of the curve, like on the top part there, bottom part down there, it's going to go 2.5 up, 2.5 down, so I'll have an even 5 points on the vertical. And I chose 5 on the vertical stem and 6 on the horizontal stem because there's an optical balance. You perceive horizontal lines thicker when they're compared to the same exact shape. It's an optical illusion. But so what you do is you thin out that horizontal curve so it feels more balanced with the vertical curve, which is a little bit thicker. Just kind of keeping in mind the optical illusions involved with this type. So we'll select OK with that offset. I guess I can show that one more time. We're going to turn on auto stroke as well. What that does is it will sometimes shift the points, but we're not really aligned with any grid, so it's not super much. It doesn't really matter a whole lot. create that monoline, and there you go. We have an outline form which started from just a sketch. So we got the monoline form, and then we have an outline form, or I guess it's still a monoline, just thicker. Well, what this does is it has an an inner curve and an outer curve, and that's the key part here. Is now that we have the inner curve, we can shape that to build the negative space of the counters, and then we have an outer curve, we can shape the negative space around the outside of the letter form. And so yeah, so now let's, sorry, let me take a break, coffee break. That's good coffee. Alright, where was I? I got the inner form and the outer form. What we're going to do is start building out, let's look at some examples. Example time and example corner. Here's a good one. This is the Speedball. This is the Speedball textbook on copper plate. Let me make sure that you guys can see this on my stream. What we have here is an exemplar, is what it's called. And it has the order of the strokes that you're supposed to make with a pen, an actual pointed pen. And it shows you the direction, angle of everything, so just a good reference for letter forms. But what I like to do is I like to study these exemplars of real handwritings. It's just like going out and designing a font and having real signs of type as your example, as your starting point. So referencing this when I'm making my font, I can be more specific about seeing where they're adding the thick, where they're adding the thin, where the letters are, where the contrast is really weighted onto that. So again, looking at historical samples, local library, Seattle King County Library System is excellent, Orange County Library System, which I'm down in California right now. They have great access to letter form specimens, books, old magazines from type places. Specimen books or calligraphy exemplars are my favorite source material by far, because you get the most realistic handwriting impression. And so yeah, as you can see, I have a bunch of, this was the initial one that I'm referencing for this font. And really looking at how hairline thin some of these are, I'm going to change mine up a little bit. I'm going to add a little bit more thickness to that part of the curve, but you can treat these however you want, but seeing really here, it thin, loops up. And it really gets thick right at that, almost at the extreme of that down part, and then all the way pressured until the very bottom, until the pressure all the way comes back up to the thin part. And then again, staying thin all the way through. It's an interesting font. It's kind of Spencerian, but it's got the copper plate lowercase. It's interesting. So yeah, looking at these examples is really key for me. And so what I'll do is, we have the image dropped in, and this is a scan of someone's handwriting. This is the archival types exemplar of their font. But it's a really crud bitmap resolution, and I'm changing the weights up a little bit from theirs, offering some stylistic sets. And this is historical revival, so you're going to be working with samples that are this pixelated or worse. You have to no pixelated. And I'm still drawing a lot of letter forms by hand too. You need to be doing that for the rest of your character set to make sure there's consistency between the letters that you have to work with initially and what those look like, but then the other letters that you don't have, you need to kind of invent their shapes a little bit. So it's good to reference other fonts in the same style, or other handwritings in the same style. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to bring this down, retain what I'm doing. Okay, So again, these are the extremes, the farthest. It's like maximum, minimum, but on a horizontal axis. You remember that from math class, geometry. That's extreme point there, outside line, inside line. And we want to cut into this negative space to add some thickness to that whole arc there. So what I'll do, keeping in mind this width, 6 pixels high. Let's lose that one. What I'll do is, okay, it's a 6. We want to keep that width of that line all the way up for the most part, and then as soon as it gets to this branching off point is when it's going to start to get thicker and thicker and thicker. So we'll take this inner extreme point and we'll notch that over. I'm not going to do 10 points, but maybe 5, and then not moving the whole line, but just shifting the node down in and kind of tucking it into that curve so that it retains that 6-point width all the way up until it starts expanding right there. Is really what we're looking for. I'm trying to keep that still nice and even. And again, don't worry about the shape of the negative space quite yet. What we want to do first is position these extreme points into the negative space where we can get that weight contrast and still work with the shape of the contrast as well. So I'm just cutting down into the negative space to give us some more shape. See how this is still thin, and now this side's really thickening up a little bit compared. So just shifting it out and down a little bit. It's not even right now, but it's building into that negative space. Yeah. Now what I'll do is again pull that line in like we did with the other ones, keeping it even. So noticing these top 2 extreme points and their lines. See how they're offset. 39 horizontal, 12 top, so 40 by 12 about. This is what, 14 by 50? So, but keeping in mind the shapes of those so they're about even. They look about even. There we go. So it really digs into that G shape a little bit. And so if you were writing this with a pen, an actual pointed pen, if you've used those before, I highly recommend it. Start super thin here, go up, thin, very light pressure. As soon as you come to this hook, you'll start adding in pressure on the pen. It'll get thicker like this. You'll start easing up as you start coming down, and then as soon as you hit the arc back to the bottom of this loop is when you'll go all the way back to thin. It'll lighten all the way up, lighter pressure on the upstroke, and then heavier pressure on the downstroke again to build out this bottom thicker part. So I'm just going to start by widening this so that we have a shape to work with, at least a main stroke shape. And then I'm going to just tuck these lines in. I'm going to keep that out a little bit. Actually, so I'm going to move that over. I'll shift those out. So there, it's a little bit more even of a shape between there. And then we'll actually worry about okay, so see it's starting to thicken up there. I'll work on this corner. I'm not liking this corner at all right now. But, you know, it's what we're working with. Okay, so this gets tricky because if you'll see, this outer curve comes down really low, and we want the bottom extreme to be pretty far down, pretty even between this edge and this edge. So keeping it pretty centered. But this point, however, the inner part of the curve, it really doesn't connect until way over here. And that's really how we get this sweeping effect. But this really fucks up our corner. Excuse my language. So we gotta work on this whole corner, keeping in mind that the negative space of this whole loop could look entirely different. Or the extremes don't have to be, you know, positioned right on top of each other like this. You see those ones are, and these ones, see they're offset a little bit, and that's how it creates that contrast coming in. See, these ones are pretty much even, so it keeps a little bit more consistency. And I'll go back through and even that out too, making sure the thin is all even through. But for now, so we pulled that one over, and this is where it gets a little bit tricky because since it's shifted over, we don't really abide. These are totally different shapes. Totally different, I mean, similar shapes curves, but they're coming in at different speeds. So this one needs, you gotta just keep that in mind. So making sure that thin stays pretty thin. It gets a little bit thinner right there. I'm not liking that. You can tell that, and I turned on the Speedpunk Pro plugin. You can see the orange curve. See how this curve here is the one on the right is the inner speed of the inner curve. So if we see it changes. See how that hump is exceeding the shape of the speed of that outer curve. Just the orange bit's coming and exceeding it like that. So we'll want to pull that in a little bit so it doesn't get as extreme. And maybe it just barely touches. Just pulls in a tad. That's not bad. And again, using Speedpunk to even out that there. That way, see how now the inner speed of the inner curve doesn't break, is not faster than the outer part of the curve, which that's how it should be. I mean, not always, but for this curve in particular, you want to keep that as even as possible, and that's how you'll keep that, and keep that really nice, smooth transition into the thick. And you'll see here, this one is really offset. There's a huge gap. But that's alright. First we shift it over to the point that we want to get that nice entrance, the increase in contrast to the entrance of the stroke. Then what we'll do is we'll go back and we'll even that curve out. So see how it's a little bit of there's a kink in it there. So we'll just pull that kink out a little bit until those lines even up. Let's see there, it's a nice even curve across like that. The speed of the inner curve does not exceed the speed of the outer curve, which is good. And we have this beautiful thick, that's very nice. Oh, I love that. Oh, that's very nice. Sorry, I get very excited sometimes. I like when the shape of the letter really comes out as if it was planned, but you know, it's more of just a beautiful accident. Work on this a bit. That's better. Sorry, I'm just cleaning up some of these lines, going back through, making sure they're a little bit more even with the overall speed. Let's see, this one got moved over, so I'm going to shift that down. Shift this one over a bit, get that inner one. Not bad. Oh, we'll work on that top curve, but now you're getting the general shape of it at least. Just gonna go back and just clean this up. Nice, that's pretty good. I'm actually liking the shape of that. And there's another character that I did an A earlier. I'll show you those in a second, but the A has, I'm not sure if I'm liking this or not, so I'd love your feedback, but the A has thicker, the G has this thicker on the top loop, the A has thicker on both of these loops on the left entrance stroke, or I guess exit stroke of it. I'm wondering, I feel like those should retain thin because I guess it would go down thick, then thin out, and it would stay thin on the up, and then then it would get thicker down on this inner curve, and then it'd be thin on this. So I've actually done this incorrectly. The contrast of these curves is not consistent with the way this letter would have been written. So if you had a pointed pen, you'd have started at the top right here. Very light pressure, increasing pressure all the way down, increasing, getting the heaviest pressure right here, the letter. Then lightening up your pen pressure, getting really thin, and then thin on the upstroke. So light pressure on the upstroke all the way to the top, and then heavier pressure on the downstroke. So it should be getting thicker down here, but as you can see, I put the thick on the upstroke, so that's incorrect. What I'll do later on is I'll go back and reverse. See, I must have seen that thicker on the sketch and thought that that was the right side, but that's not how I want my letter to look. I want my letter to be more consistent with the way pointed pens work. So I'll go back and switch, make this not weighted, make this thin, and then make this curve here thicker, and have it tuck up against that A. That's a good example. Maybe the C, we can see if that one abides. Okay, the C is a better example. Here's how it should be. The A should be more like the C. The C starts its letter up here. So it goes light, then it gets heavy on this first swoop, goes thin all the way up, and then it gets heavy all the way on this big down. Then it goes thin all the way on this up, and then it goes heavy all the way down, and then thin on the up. So the C is correct the way the weight is, the weight contrast is, and the side of the letter that it's on. So the weight is on the left side, on the downstrokes of the C. If on the A letter I had started on this point right here, and had gone light, then heavy first, then light, the upstroke, then heavy on this outer curve, that would make more sense. Except that the main stroke of this A is that first one. So you can't go from a thin to a thick upstroke. That doesn't work on pointed pens. You'd be digging into your paper. So again, that indicates to me that the starting point on this pointed pen is at this top node on the A, and it goes down thick first and then light. Got a little bit thicker. Out. So again, that one A is not very good. I'm going to mark it red, and that way we know to come back later and work on that letter form. I think, yeah, we still have the monoline of that A, so that's good. Always, always, always copy your layers copy your sketches and your monolines into new layers. So I'll even take this G right now and copy it and name it V1, just so that I can do more editing on this layer, mess with it, but always retain that backup just in case. Just in case something crazy happens and it's like, oh, I need to go back. Okay, there we go. Yeah, so that is my process for taking a monoline form and adding some contrast to it. Again, leave any questions. I'll answer any comments you have, questions. I'll be trying to make these a little bit more concise. I'm going to have more of a plan ahead of time, but right now, just quarantined in Orange County, so I'm going to be making fonts and sharing that with you guys. Happy to give you guys any resources you need. Sorry if I say guys and you're a girl. It's the way I speak down here. And yeah, let me know.